Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye,
Captain! We've got a history of Buffalo Soldiers here in California.
That's why we're here. We're up here to learn more about the Buffalo Soldiers.
I want to ask you, like, what do you guys do around here?
The 10th Cavalry was one of the original Buffalo Soldier units that was formed back in 1866. And if you go up to Kings Canyon where they got the big sequoia redwoods and stuff like that, the Buffalo Soldiers built all the roads in that park. Right, we have our signature event, which is our annual roundup, and it's going to be June 14th and 15th this year.
Welcome to Valley Vibes, your show about culture, arts, and happenings in the Imperial Valley from a youth perspective. I'm Dr. Tom Tackey, the creator and executive producer of Valley Vibes. In today's episode, we will focus on a local Black history topic, the Buffalo Soldiers. For this, we took Valley Vibes on the road to visit the Camp Lockett Museum in nearby Campo, California. Camp Lockett was the last horse outpost of the Buffalo Soldiers during World War II. So without further ado, let's get this started. Valley Vibes is on the road. Hey, welcome to Valley Vibes. We're up here at Camp Lockett in Campo, California. We're with the museum curator, Les. Les, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Les Collin. I'm the director at the Camp Lockett Cavalry Museum. I'm also a member of the 9th and 10th Horse Cavalry Association and Company H, the Mounted Buffalo Soldier Unit. And I've been involved with the history of the Buffalo Soldiers since the early 2000s.
Wow, that is really cool. And that's why we're here. We're up here to learn more about the Buffalo Soldiers and a little bit of Black History Month. And so we're going to kind of walk around through the museum. I know you listeners can't, follow along, but I'm going to turn this over to our Valley Vibes host, Dom. So, Dom, here you go.
What's going on? Good morning. Well, we're here and we're going to be learning about some Buffalo Soldiers. I'm really excited to get into this. And, well, how can we start this off? Like, tell us about the history of Buffalo Soldiers.
So kind of before we get into Camp Lockett, we got to look at a little bit of history.
Yeah.
So the war in Europe had the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese that signed the pact. We were having trade relation problems with the Japanese. So the United States was trying to stay out of the war in Europe, but once they signed the pact with Germany, we knew we might get pulled into it eventually, so the government started looking at different things for defense of our country. One of the things they were afraid of is along Campo here, we've got these mountains, and back in those days, there's a railroad line it came out of Yuma, Arizona, went through El Centro, up here to Campo, and went through a tunnel into Tecate, Mexico. From Tecate, it went to Tijuana. From Tijuana, it went to downtown San Diego. So for those of you that are familiar with the trolley that runs from downtown San Diego to the border, those railroad tracks actually used to link up here in Campo at one time.
Oh, really?
So, and then they didn't have the big interstate. They had Highway 80, which is pretty much what Interstate 80 is now.
Yeah.
And then the Highway 94. So they were afraid that where the tunnel is that goes into Mexico, the mountains were really low there, and they're afraid the Japanese could land an invasion force in Mexico because Mexico is neutral, roll across the flatland real fast, capture the tunnel, and so the railroad tracks and the two roads would be the main supply routes and launch further invasions into the United States. So they decided to build Camp Lockett here. Now, Camp Lockett was the last military installation that was actually built for horse soldiers. So what they did was down by El Centro, you got the little area called Sealy, town of Sealy down there. You got that Naval Air Station where they keep the Blue Angels and that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually started out as a cavalry base, and they had the 11th Cavalry Station down there. So in the 1940, beginning of 1941, they moved the 11th Cavalry up here to Campo. So they rode from Sealy up here on horseback. And they originally built the first phase of Camp Lockett. It was built in 3 phases. So they built the first phase. So they were here from 1941 to 1942. In 1942, they disbanded the 11th Cavalry as a horse unit, and they turned it into a mechanized unit, and they brought the 10th Cavalry from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So the 10th Cavalry was one of the original Buffalo Soldier units that was formed back in 1866. And they used to have to patrol all the way from here in Campo. They'd patrol all the way to Calexico, and then they'd patrol all the way down to San Diego to the Otay Lakes area. They didn't have to go all the way to the ocean because we had a lot of coastal defenses there.
Yeah.
So they determined that one regiment was handling an extra lot of work, so they decided to form what they call a brigade in the Army, and that's actually 2 regiments. So they formed the 10th or the 28th Cavalry Regiment, and that was the last segregated cavalry unit that was formed. Was right here in Campo. And as I said, Campo was built in 3 phases. So when you first come into Campo, what I call beautiful downtown Campo down there, that was actually all those buildings were part of the Army base. So where the post office is and the fire department and the hardware store and all that stuff was part of the base down there. They've got a VFW, a single-story building down there. That was actually the headquarters building. And then the 2-story buildings down there, they were the barracks, and they've turned those into Section 8 housing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So a lot of downtown Campo, though, some private investors have bought it, so it's owned privately, and it doesn't belong to the county anymore. And then if you go farther down Sheridan Road, there's an area where they've got a subdivision with the Campo Hills. They got those KB homes. That was one of the first big subdivisions that was put here. Well, that actually used to look like downtown Campo because that's where they built for the 28th Cavalry Regiment. But at that time, the government was renting the land. It was on private property, so when they closed the base down, they had to put everything back to its natural state. That's why those buildings aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
And then the 3rd phase was actually kind of unique. When you come into Campo, there's a bunch of single-story H-shaped buildings there. That was phase 3. Now, that really didn't have anything to do with horse soldiers, but that was one of the series of convalescent hospitals that were first built. So the Army built about 100 convalescent hospitals at different areas, and Campo was hospital was it was Mitchell Hospital was built up here, but that came late after World War II was pretty much over. But that's where it was built up in 3 phases.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all that. So I want to ask you, like, what do you guys do around here? Like, when people come to visit, what do you show them? What's the most like exciting part for you to show?
Basically, I kind of give them a walking tour. We kind of talk about how the cavalry was first formed. Okay, so the cavalry kind of dates back to the Revolutionary War. In Europe, they had their mounted soldiers were called dragoons.
Dragoon.
And right, so basically what dragoons were, they were infantrymen, but they put them on horses, so they would ride from point A to point B, get off their horses, and then fight. So they didn't actually fight on their horses.
Yeah.
And Washington liked that concept, so he formed a couple of regiments of dragoons during the Revolutionary War. And then in the 1850s, they changed from dragoons to what they call the light cavalry.
Elite?
Light cavalry.
Oh, light cavalry.
So, and then in 1872, they kind of switched things around, and they just started calling them, the cavalry. So that was it. So, and in 1944, the Army said that the cavalry was obsolete because of the tanks and jeeps and everything.
Yeah.
And they disbanded all the cavalry units at that time.
Do you know around what time that was? Like what year that was?
That was in 1944. Yeah, 1944. And World War II was over in 1945. So.
And so you said the 10th Regiment, the Buffalo Soldiers, arrived here in 42 or 41?
1942.
1942. So they were here from 42 to the end of the war.
Yeah, till 1944.
Okay. How many were there?
Well, as far as troops, there were probably about 2,000 or 3,000
Wow.
soldiers. They had about 7,000 horses. But you got to remember that just the Buffalo Soldier Regiments didn't make the whole thing up, the base, because you had to have, all your supporting elements, like you had your motor T,
Sure.
you had your trucks, you had your MPs, cooks, artillery, machine gunners. I mean, you can ride out in these hills and find old gun emplacements and everything they had in case somebody would attack. Same way, like if you go down into San Diego along the coastline there, you'll find a lot of gun emplacements and everything like that, like the big round concrete bunkers that they had the cannons in and things of that nature you see in the World War II movies. So anyway, it was kind of unique because you actually look at the way they moved the bases around back then. Like I said, they started at Camp Lockett here. Well, a lot of people don't realize it, but where that Miramar Marine Corps Air Station is, the one that used to be the Naval Air Station where they made the movie Top Gun. Okay, that actually started out as a horse-drawn artillery base for the Army called Camp Kearney. And then
Kearney Mesa.
right, Kearney Mesa area. So then when the Army got done using it as Camp Kearney, they gave it to the Marines and it was called Camp Elliott. And then, like I said, they were moving defenses around and stuff like that, so they were afraid that the Japanese naval gunfire could hit North Island, where we had the Naval Air Station at. So they moved the planes into Camp Elliott, and they called it Miramar Naval Air Station. They also didn't have anything to protect Los Angeles and Long Beach. They used to have a big naval base like we've got here in San Diego and Long Beach. So they took the Marines out of Camp Elliott, and they built Camp Pendleton in 1942. Kind of see how things kind of move around a little bit and how the history works out.
And I have a question about the type of artillery and infantry you guys use. Like, what type of weapons were used around like this time?
Well, we can kind of take a walk in the museum.
Oh,
I can kind
that'd
of
be
show
great.
you a little bit.
Could get pictures
Some
of
of the
these.
weapon
And
systems. They use the standard artillery units. As for the infantry, most of your infantrymen carried the M1 Grand, but that was a little heavy for the horse soldiers, so a lot of times the horse soldiers would use the M1 carbine. They also used the Thompson machine guns, and being horse soldiers, they all carried the pistol, which was the 45 caliber pistol, the model 1911.
oh wow,
So,
beautiful gun.
and naturally they had the saber. So this is the cavalry saber right here. They call it the wrist breaker because a lot of times in using it,
Oh wow,
it would
it's-
break somebody's wrist.
yeah,
So it's a fairly long sword
yeah.
compared to normal swords. The reason why it's longer is because back in the old days, in the Indian Wars and the Civil War, they would actually fight using their sabers to attack the enemy, that were foot soldiers and stuff
Yeah.
like that, so that's why it's longer. And you can see this one here is dated 1862.
Wow.
So this is actually from the
Valuable
Civil
piece.
War era. And this is what they call a sword knot. So it fits on the hilt of the sword, and then you slip your wrist through it like this. And that way, if the sword gets knocked out of your hand, you don't have to stop and try and get off your horse and all that other stuff. You just pull it back up with your
Ooh,
wrist.
can you tell me about these revolvers? I want to say.
Right. So, kind of got to bend down, but that's the old Sharps rifle, so that would be back during the Indian Wars, and then later they went to the Winchester style and the Henry repeating rifles. But they first started out using what they call a ball and cap or black powder percussion weapons. So this here is an 1858 Remington. That's an 1860 Army Colt. In 1872, they switched from using the ball and cap to the pistol where they put the bullets in. So the way the ball and cap works is You notice that long rod right there? Okay, that comes down. So what you have to do is you take a black powder, put it in the cylinder, and then you got a round lead ball, which is made a little bit thicker than the cylinder, and then you take that rod and push it, and it rams it down, and it shaves the lead off of it, which makes it a tight seal to it, kind of like a piston ring in a car. Then right here, you notice a little copper piece, that's a cap. So you put the cap on, and these are what they call single action. So you have to pull the hammer back. You can't just pull the trigger and shoot it. You pull the hammer back. Then you pull the trigger. When it hits the cap, it makes a spark, causes the gunpowder to explode, and it pushes the lead ball out. And then, like I said, in 1872, they switched over to the Peacemaker, and it was made by Colt, and that shoots the bullets. And this saddle right here, this is what's known as the McClellan saddle. So he was a colonel in the Army, and he wanted to design a lighter saddle for the horses because they used them like cars back in those days. That was our transportation. So this here is an actual 1858 McClellan saddle. So this is the type they used during the Civil War.
Way cool.
And then, like we were talking about dragoons, this is one of the later dragoon uniforms right here. However, this is the light cavalry uniform. However, the dragoons, they had the same uniform, but instead of having yellow, everything was done in orange. And when they switched to the light cavalry, that kind of made the soldiers mad because yellow was a sign of a coward, so a lot of them didn't like to wear it. But that was the light cavalry uniform. And then in 1872, they switched over to cavalry, which they used the standard blue cavalry wool uniform, kind of like in the old John Wayne movies. And they went from using the rawhide saddle to leather. They made the black one, the black saddle. And then in the 1900s, they switched over to the brown color saddles.
Going back to these pistols and all, I grew up in Fort Benton, Montana, which was it's the furthest up the Missouri River that steamboats could go from St. Louis. So it's called the birthplace of Montana. Yeah. But all around in the hills there, we'd find these old 4564s. Is that the
right?
Yeah, is it 4564 slugs? It was crazy. It was just so cool to find these old slugs from people shooting in the hills and stuff. Yeah. But anyway, interesting connection.
And what about this item right here?
That's a trumpet. So that's how they kind of communicated, whether on horseback, because it was loud. So they had different tunes that they would play, meant different things like charge, retreat, assemble, and things like that. And you can kind of see we've got some chevrons from the uniform. So these right here were used during the Dragoon era and the Civil War era. Then in 1872, when they switched the designs up a little bit. So you notice the ones that got like the little trumpets on it?
Yeah.
So that would be a trumpeter. So he would wear those stripes and he would blow the bugle. This would be your chief trumpeter. And then the one right here, this is actually a saddler sergeant. So he would take care of the tack and this stuff. And this here's an ordnance sergeant. He'd take care of distributing ammunition and stuff like that. And these here are commissaries, so they would be on the supply trains. Yeah. So they would have the cavalry out front, kind of like today they use their Humvees out on the forward edge of the battlefield. Then they have a wagon train with all the supplies to supply the cavalry, and they would meet up, and get resupply when they were running low. So the ordnance sergeant and the commissary sergeant would travel with them. Now, unlike the John Wayne movies where they show the wagon train with the horse soldiers protecting them, the Army actually used infantry to walk along because they didn't really run the wagons very fast. So they just kind of walked at a pace. So the average day's travel on horseback walking is about 40 miles a day.
Wow.
When you do it at a trot, you can do about 80 miles a day. And then when you do it a full gallop, you do about 160 miles a day. Wow. Now, when they did the full gallop, I don't know if you've ever seen those old John Wayne movies where they're running real hard with the horses, and then all of a sudden he goes, whoa, and he yells, dismount.
Yeah.
They used to have to stop every so often. They would get off and walk the horses, let the horses cool down and get a little rest and everything, and then they would get back on and take off at the full gallop again.
Wow. And was there a specific type of horse or like that they use, or is it just any?
No, they
regular
pretty much most. They used all kinds. They had over 7,000 horses up here.
Oh wow.
When they had the cavalry, and they used to have them though kind of like color coded. So like Alpha Company might be all black horses, Bravo Company would be all brown and this and that. And then they had one they called the Calico Company, and that's where they had mixed all different color horses in there and stuff like that. But most of the time they had the different like thoroughbreds, Morgans, border horse, things of that nature.
So when the Buffalo Soldiers were first sent up here, what type of reception, perhaps issues and things maybe arose because of the norm of segregation that existed at the time?
Right. Yeah. They didn't get a warm welcome. That's for sure. They had problems with over like in Hakumba. They had some restaurants, stuff like that, so a lot of them couldn't go in some of the diners there and everything. There were certain areas of Campo they couldn't do anything. Basically, the worldly women were up here back in those days, from the 1800s. They had the saloon girls and so on and so forth, so they still had the bar women up here. Well, there was a certain area where the white people would go drink at, and then the African-American people, they had to go all the way down to Potrero over in that area, and that's where they had their entertainment down there.
And how long did that last? That like segregation, like did they ever get used to it, or like
segregate? They quit the segregation in the military right around the Korean War era. They signed the proclamations during the World War II area, but I'm not going to try and get into politics or anything. But if you look at the Democratic side of the house, they were more the slavery and stuff like that. Like during the Civil War, your southern states were mostly Democrat, your northern states were Republican. So the Democratic philosophy for many years was anti-black, and that's where you got all these Jim Crow laws and segregation, things of that nature. So
it flipped sometime.
Right,
It's like
so
the Republican Party was what we think of as Democrats now, and vice versa.
Right. So it's just, like I said, I'm not trying to be political, but at that time frame, the government, they didn't really trust the black soldiers. Point being, they didn't, like during World War I, you don't hear of too many stories of battles with black soldiers because they really didn't want the black soldiers to get involved. They put them back, in supply, building latrines and things of that nature, more in a support element than a combat element. Although they've proven themselves, because a lot of people don't realize it, but the black soldiers, they started in 1866. So during the Civil War, you didn't have black soldiers in the Army, the regular Army. You had what was called the UCT, the U.S. Colored Troops. And they were made up of volunteers. So like, have you ever seen that movie Glory where they talk about the 54th Massachusetts? Well, anytime you've got a state name in the unit designator, that means they were part of a state militia, which is kind of like our National Guard today. So at the beginning of the Civil War, the Confederate Army was bigger than the Union Army. So they had to close all the bases out west to bring all those soldiers back. And they had to call up all these state militias. So the 54th Massachusetts was actually a volunteer unit. So when the Civil War was over, the volunteers said, well, we're not part of the regular army, that's it, our job's done, and they went home. Well, that left the Union Army to occupy all the southern states to make sure another rebellion didn't come up. Well, they didn't have enough people to reman those bases out west that they abandoned, and the Native Americans had taken over most of that territory now. So in 1866, Congress formed 4 cavalry units and 4 infantry units. Now, the first 2 cavalry units were the 7th and 8th Cavalry, and we've all heard the stories of George Armstrong Custer, Little Bighorn. He had the 7th. And they formed the 9th and the 10th, and then the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st Infantry, which is unique because back then, all the enlisted were black soldiers, but all the officers were white back then when they first started out. So that's when they first let African Americans in the United States Army back then. And they did have the prejudices because a lot of the troops up here in the World War II era, they would take and ride the train down to San Diego when they got those long weekend passes and things of that nature. Well, they couldn't ride in the cars with the white people, so they had to ride in the baggage cars. And if you actually go over and take a tour of the Railroad Museum, they've restored one of those baggage cars, and it's called a Jim Crow car.
The Jim Crow. Be awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It was just bad times back then. Like,
Right.
But glad it got better over
Right.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also, if you remember, I told you about when they built the hospital over here. By then, this base wasn't like a combat base. It was more of a, like I said, the hospital and stuff like that. Well, they used to have a prisoner of war camp up in Riverside, and it was called Camp Han, and they brought a bunch of those prisoners down here, and they actually had POWs, a POW camp. They didn't have any fences, they didn't have any machine guns, guard towers, any of that other stuff. Matter of fact, some of the Italians would get part-time jobs working on the farms and the ranches and the businesses here. And most of the prisoners, like I said, were Italian, so being Catholic, they built a shrine with the Madonna, with the Virgin Mary, and it's still over in that same area where it was built today. So if you go down Sheridan Road, like I was telling you where they had that subdivision at, there's a little restaurant there called the Campo Cafe. If you look across the street, there's a rock formation, and I think there's a gate you can get through and a little pathway up there, but the statue's still there that was built by the Italian prisoners from that time frame.
So we've been talking with Les of the Camp Lockett Museum, and Les, what can a person do if they come up here? What all are they gonna, You've told us all about the history here. So the museum is open when and some of that.
We're kind of going into transition period right now. Right now we're open Saturdays 9 to 5, but we're going to be opening up on Saturday and Sunday. But we're going to change our hours to 10 to 5.
All right. Oh.
And this museum is the quartermaster's house. Is that
well, actually. This was a home owned by the Ferguson family. It was built in the 1920s. They were cattle ranchers and had dairies and stuff. And their original home actually burnt down, and it was a little farther down the way here, but they built this one here. So they used this as a like a headquarters. So the general didn't actually live or sleep in this building. But they used it for his office and stuff like that.
Administrative, okay.
Yeah.
It's a really cool facility. Like for our listeners, when you come in, there's the different exhibits. There's the uniforms. There's the saddles. There's the feed bag on the horse model and the cover on the horse and weapons and it is fascinating. And we're with a eyesight of the border fence, which the Buffalo Soldiers were patrolling. Like you said, from here to Calexico, basically, huh?
Yeah, they went from here to Calexico and then here down towards the San Diego area to the Otay Lakes.
That's huge.
Do you roughly know like the radius, like the mile radius of how much that is?
I'd have to look at the map, but you figure it's about, well, I buy my hay from that Tom's Hay Farm down there by Calexico. So you figure it's probably about 70 miles from there to here. And it's probably another 60 miles from here to the San Diego area down there.
Right, because these are rugged mountains up here.
And back then there was no wall.
No.
It was all open.
Exactly.
So it was real easy to cross.
Exactly.
It wasn't even a road, basically. It was just dirt.
And over in here, another unique thing during World War II, the officers didn't get issued uniforms like the enlisted did. They had to pay for their own. So I made a small collection of the types of uniforms that were utilized during the World War II era. And all these uniforms are pretty much World War II era, except for these two here. These are what they call the dress blue uniform, and these here are from 1912 era.
Wow.
And then if you kind of notice, you've got the green coat. That was after World War I, before in the beginning of World War II, and then they switched over to the brown coat, which they called chocolate back in those days, and they called the pants pink. And everything was interchangeable. So if you wanted to wear the chocolate coat, chocolate pants, chocolate shirt, chocolate tie, you could, or you go with all the khaki, so on and so forth, mix and match. And this is what the dress cavalry uniform would look like. These boots they refer to as Patton boots.
Miss Patton.
Because Patton, he started out as a horse soldier with the cavalry, and then when they disbanded cavalry, they put him in tanks. And the tankers liked the boots, and the Jeep drivers, they liked the boots a lot, so they just kept them, and they use them for the tanks and stuff like that. So you watch the World War II movies, you'll also see the mechanized guys wear the same type of boots. And these are the dress uniforms over here. So that would be a standard dress blue uniform for a colonel. This is what they call an evening dress, and they would wear a white shirt with a little bow tie on it. And then with the dress uniform, the evening dress, you've got two options. You can wear the blue pants with the stripe, or they have black pants. They also, Army at that time had a dress white uniform, where they had, that would be the special evening dress, and they have white pants and a white shirt. This uniform here, if you notice in the back, it's got the tails like the old tuxedos had.
Yeah.
So this here is for a 3-star general. If you notice, the 3 stars on the sleeves. So that would be your lieutenant general. And what's unique is in the officer's rank structure, you have a lieutenant, which is lower than a major.
Yeah.
But in the general officer's rank, you have the major general is only 2 stars, and the lieutenant general is 3 stars. Reason being was many years ago, they didn't have a enlisted sergeant major for a while. And then when they adopted the enlisted sergeant major's rank, the general officers had a rank called a sergeant major general. So that's why they had the 2 stars, and that's why they had the lieutenant was higher. Well, people started getting confused when they would say sergeant major. They didn't know if he was talking about a general or an enlisted guy.
Yeah.
So in the officers' ranks, they dropped the sergeant major and started calling him just a major general. So.
Do you know what the highest rank an African American could get? Like, up to where could they get to?
Well, as time progressed, the first black officers that went through West Point was in the 1800s. Matter of fact, this gentleman right here, this is Charles Young. He was actually born during the Civil War, right at the end of the Civil War. So he was a baby, so he really never, did the plantation thing or anything. But he joined the cavalry, and before we had park rangers, the United States Army used to patrol all our national parks.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
he was in charge of the 9th Cavalry for a while, and if you go up to Kings Canyon where they got the big sequoia redwoods and stuff like that, the Buffalo Soldiers built all the roads in that park.
Oh, wow.
And they used to patrol it. So, we've got a history of Buffalo Soldiers here in California quite a bit. Matter of fact, that's why when they the park rangers took over and they phased the Army out, why the Rangers wear the Montana Peak hats out of respect for the Army. The other thing that's unique about it was when they were doing that transition, he was close to retirement, and they didn't have anybody in the forestry department with how to work rangers and patrol and things of that nature. So they hired him as the first director with the parks and rangers. Also, if you notice, we got the picture of our former president, Ronald Reagan. He was a horse soldier. And also we got the POW jacket. We take our uniforms, dye them blue, and they would stencil PW on the front and on the back. And that meant they were a prisoner of war. So, and like I said, they didn't have any fences or gates up here. So after the war was over, the prisoners had the option. They could either here stay in the United States, or they could go back to Italy.
Wow.
And it sounds kind of funny, but we have a product of that lives right up here over in Lake Morena, which is an extension of Campo here area. And his mother worked on the base here, and his father was a POW. So after the war was over, they fell in love while he was a POW. So after the war was over, they got married and he stayed here.
Okay.
And also, we have an individual that's on our board of directors for the Camp Lockett Events and Equestrian Facility. His name is Bill Lockett, and he is a descendant of Colonel Lockett,
exactly.
that the base was named after.
Nice. So, Les, this has been really fascinating, and I encourage all of our listeners to, come up here on the weekend and have a look around. I mean, it's a little difficult to find, but not that hard. All you got to do is follow the signs,
It's a
And
short drive too. Like you'll get here pretty quick.
but what is on tap for events and such coming up?
Well, like I said, our museum's open on Saturdays 9 to 5. However, we realize a lot of people work on Saturdays, or it's the only time you can do family functions and stuff like that. So if you have schools or church groups, we have those come up. If anybody would like to make an appointment, we can arrange to make an appointment, and we can do pretty much any day, any time. I'm retired, so I have nothing to do except volunteer work. So I work harder now for less money. Back then, I don't get no money, period.
But you said there's
Right,
something
we
coming
also
this
have
summer?
we also have the Camp Lockett Events and Equestrian Facility, which is the museum's a division of, and we acquired 167 acres from the government. We do a lot of horse events, like barrel racing and gymkhanas and things like that. We've also got a miniature race or a small racetrack up here. There's a gentleman out of Ocotillo. I don't know if you're familiar with the Red Feather little restaurant there. It's a restaurant convenience store. Well, he promotes motorcycles, so he rents the facilities. And on the weekends, they have races up here. They have go-karts, microcars, motorcycles, trikes, and quads. And they come in on Friday night, and then they do their stuff on Saturdays and Sundays. He does it from, probably about maybe eight or 9 months out of the year.
All right. Can't wait to bring Philip here.
So, and then when we first pulled up, you were telling us that there's a big event coming in June,
Right, we
kind of
have our-
featuring the Buffalo Soldiers.
Right, we have our signature event, which is our annual roundup, and it's going to be June 14th and 15th this year. We also kind of incorporated, the other museums kind of incorporated onto it. We call it Campo Days also, and they open their museums up, so I get a lot of people traveling around for that. But ours, we have a organization that comes in dressed up in the 1860s cavalry uniforms, Buffalo Soldiers. They set up their tents, covered wagons, things of that nature. They've got a lot of artifacts, and they give a real good history about the Buffalo Soldiers. And they actually, at one point, I think they've ridden their horses in the Rose Bowl parade a few times, things of that nature.
Whoever needs a ride of that, let me know. I'll bring you guys.
Right. Well, like I said, I was with the 9th 10th Horse Cavalry Association. Now, that started in 1967. It was started by actual members that were considered Buffalo Soldiers from the World War II era. And when I first joined, people would say, well, where are you from? I'd say, well, San Diego. They'd say, well, what part? And I said, well, probably never heard of this place called Campo. There's one guy who says, I was stationed there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was
What a
amazing. So I
coincidence.
got to talk to a few individuals that were actually stationed here during the World War II era. But they have their reunion. It's the last week of July, because July 28th, 1866. So they have their reunion. There's about 40 chapters throughout the United States, and every year they have it in different cities and locations. Well, they had one in Houston, Texas one year. And we participated in a parade with Buffalo Soldiers. Like I said, we had people come from all over. We had over 300 horses in that parade.
Wow.
So people was dressed up in the old uniform and stuff like that. So it's pretty neat.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. It was great.
No problem.
Thank you so much for your time and letting us check this all out.
No problem. Well, you're welcome. Come back, and you want to make arrangements, fill that van up with some of your students.
Yeah,
Come on up there. I mean,
Sounds like a great idea.
we get bus loads up there. I've had buses, that carry 55 people and stuff come up. So it's
All
no
right,
problem.
Les. Well, thank you
Okay,
so
thank
much.
you.
so much.
So that was our very first Valley Vibes on the Road show, you know, and we spoke with Les of the Camp Lockett Museum in Campo, California. That was really pretty cool.
Very fun trip, yeah.
Yeah,
Even the way there was just nice.
Yeah, it's an easy trip up there.
Yeah.
You know, from El Centro, it took about an hour.
Yeah, like 50 minutes. And we're like, and if you're moving a little fast, you'll get there faster.
Right. So what do you think about the whole museum, you know?
I think it was a very like nice experience of just like a taste of history, because a lot of these like education plans don't really teach you the history that's like African American. They'll teach you this other history about just like everything else, but
Exactly.
they won't go into detail about these like hidden gems. Like it's really nice to hear about it and to see it in person too.
Right. I mean, it's like I think a lot of times when we think about Black history, that it you know is something that happened somewhere else and not here.
Yeah.
And in all actuality, there are some really significant things that happened
Here in the
in the valley and near us. And you know, I can pretty much guarantee you that very few people know that, you know, the Buffalo Soldiers were up there in the size that they were. You know, 3,000 of them. That's crazy.
That's a lot. Like for such a small place and like very rural, like you wouldn't expect that many soldiers to be around here, but like they were here.
Right. Right.
And even moving from like Calexico all the way to over here, these long spans of just horse riding, just you wouldn't expect it, to be honest. I didn't expect it. And I knew about the Buffalo Soldiers, just not around here. Like.
Right. Well, it was really cool for you to go up there with me, and
thank you so much for taking me.
I think we're going to have to do another Valley Vibes on the road sometime.
I'll be ready.
Okay. Thank you.
This program was produced and brought to you by Spartan Sound Productions. Special thanks to Les Keon of the Camp Lockett Museum and our Valley Vibes host, Dominic Ramos Felix. Thanks also to Dr. Thomas Taki, creator and executive producer of Spartan Sound Productions, the administration of Central Union High School, Mr. Javier Fimbers, and Power 98 for hosting us, and to you, the listeners.